Welcome back to my disembodied voice. Now, at some point in your life, you will have had to make a tough decision. The longer we live, the more inevitable difficult choices are, and as we move jobs, have children, experience bullying, face financial problems, get our heart broken, meet someone new whilst in a stable relationship, be given a dilemma at work, get our grades from school, or maybe face career challenges. It doesn't matter the person or the situation, we all have to look at something which feels impossible and make the unavoidable choice of what we do next. And big choices have consequences, which means our decisions need to be bold. It's not making a choice and seeing what happens, or trying something which we can always abandon and go back and try again. This is do or die, go hard or go home, make or break, or basically whatever decision you make will define your life and have major consequences, both good and bad. And in movies, that choice and dilemma is often part of the story, which changes narratives, defines characters, sets up conflict, or causes the audience to engage and even weep as the most heartbreaking decisions are made and characters get it wrong, right, or face misfortune either way, but head for damage control, even if that can in itself be quite catastrophic. It's a key part of pivoting in stories and helps us root, hate, and generally flesh out characters, be they villains or heroes. And hugely impactful and impossible choices which require bold, assertive, and potentially drastic action has a specific name, and it's called the Gordian Knot. And for today's video, we're going to look at the psychology, history, philosophy, and outcomes of the Gordian Knot and see how it's applied in movies. So, before we carry on, it's spoilers ahoy for any movie we discuss today, and as ever, we'll be following a flow-through chart, and today's topics are the Gordian Knot, heuristics, biology of choice, the cut. Right then, let's crack on. So, when we talk about choice, that is self-explanatory. We all make choices every day and most are very mundane. Even just having dinner when we're standing by the freezer and going, fish or chicken, or I could eat that leftover curry. Or when we go shopping and try to decide what we're going to buy to cook for our loved ones, or buy for our spouse at Christmas. Other choices are harder, like changing a job, or trying to find a way to discipline a child who might need some tough love that's going to cause consequences in the short term, but be beneficial in the long term. And other times, we come to a choice which is so complex, so difficult, and potentially catastrophic that bold action is required, and when this happens, it's called the Gordian Knot, a famous legend from ancient Phrygia, now modern-day Turkey, that became a powerful symbol of solving problems through bold and unconventional action. Okay, so let's put this in context with some history first. In the city of Gordium, there was an ancient ox cart tied to a post with an incredibly intricate knot, the Gordian Knot. Now, the knot was tied by King Gordius, or, in some other versions, his son Midas. The prophecy attached to it made the knot legendary. And this knot was so complex that it was said to be impossible to untie, and an oracle prophesied that whoever unravelled the knot would become the ruler of Asia. Now, when Alexander the Great reached Gordium in 333 BC, he was confronted with this challenge of untying the Gordian knot. However, instead of painstakingly trying to untie it, he famously sliced through the knot with his sword, though some versions say he pulled out the linchpin of the yoke, loosening it rather than cutting it. Now, Alexander the Great didn't untie it, but he solved the problem through decisive and unconventional means, and the act became a metaphor for breaking through seemingly intractable problems with bold solutions. And in today's lexicon, the phrase cutting the Gordian knot means someone taking decisive, sometimes radical action to solve a difficult or complex problem or get over a really stymied choice. Now, let's get back to Alexander the Great, who was, obviously, destined for greatness. It was in his name. And after cutting the knot, he marched on to conquer Asia and did indeed become legendary and fulfill his prophecy of greatness. So, in recap, the Gordian knot quite simply means problem, a complex dilemma or choice that seems almost impossible. Outcome, this requires bold and direct action as well as ignoring convention, such as cutting, like Alexander did. Now, some of the best examples of the Gordian knot are in the heyday of Doctor Who. Now, ignoring what the show became with Russell T Davies's new use of it for a vehicle to deliver messaging and virtue signalling, and the Doctor walking around in a skirt like he'd just mastered his first big boy trip to the toilet, back in the days of the 9th, 10th and 11th Doctors, the Gordian knots were immense. Just take the fires of Pompeii, where the Doctor and Donna arrive in Pompeii on Volcano Day. The eruption is a fixed point in time, so the Doctor cannot stop it. However, as the episode progresses and he fights the monsters, he ends up in a capsule that is stopping the explosion. If he pushes one button, 20,000 people die by his hand. If he does nothing, the entire human race dies. Now, whilst being a version of the trolley problem, which is basically an ethical dilemma to save one person or to save many, decisive action has to be taken by the Time Lord, and so he takes the bold move to save the world but kill the 20,000 residents of Pompeii. And his grief is captured expertly when he runs away and Donna begs him just to save a few lives, just save someone. But the Doctor encounters Gordian knots frequently, and being it sending Captain Jack and the Satellite 5 staff to their deaths so he can build a delta wave to stop the Daleks, or sacrifice K9 to kill the Krillitanes, the last of the Time Lords repeatedly found himself with dilemmas where he had to make a choice of loss or use radical anger to destroy the villains with a great collateral damage. It was the magic of Doctor Who. Before it decided it didn't want to offend anyone.
And I had problems with that, and a lot of us on the production team had the problems with that, of associating disability with evil.
As it showed Gordian knots being solved by radical action, which sometimes was absolutely devastating to the Doctor. So, the Gordian knot metaphor applies to complex, tangled problems where traditional solutions fail and radical, big decisions need to be made, and in its glory days, Doctor Who set these up, let the audience think over what they would do first, before having the Time Lord hating himself for the terrible choice that would burden his conscience for the rest of his life. And another great example of the Gordian knot is in the Saw movies, where Jigsaw kidnaps people, puts them in a trap, and tells them to make a choice, mutilate themselves, and suffer a horrible ordeal, or die. And the Gordian knot in Saw is about mental reframing, and people who accept the truth of the game have a chance. People who fight it conventionally almost always die, and this is the philosophy of the knot. Make a decision, no matter how difficult, or nothing will change. Let's go back to the knot itself, and if Alexander the Great doesn't cut it, the ox cart is immovable. In Saw, Jigsaw acts like fate or the Oracle of Gordian. He creates knots that can only be undone if the victim is willing to make a bold, transformative act. But that's the Gordian knot. That's big decisions, and not all decisions require bold action, and many require a simpler take and a more balanced view. And these smaller decisions often lead up to the ultimate Gordian knot. So, if we're talking about common decisions which are building towards the final big Gordian knot that sends things in motion or delivers a devastating outcome, we come to heuristics. In psychology, heuristics are cognitive shortcuts our brains use to simplify decision making. Instead of carefully analysing every detail, we use quick rules of thumb. Not everything is a Gordian knot, and in decision making, we need to be able to make choices, to quote Celine from 28 Days Later, in a heartbeat. And you do this every day without realising it, and in movies, both protagonists and antagonists make rule of thumb decisions which activate the plot throughout the story. Heuristics tend to be more widespread than specific Gordian knot problems, and examples are used to engage larger plot details. Examples are in murder mysteries, where we make snap decisions about who is most guilty based upon their look, disaster movies like Twister, which means we know for all the twisters that they encounter, an F5 beast of all twisters is going to come at the end, and in 28 Days Later, Celine sees nothing good in people and assumes that throughout the film, as a rule of thumb, you either kill or be killed. Her biggest in a heartbeat moment comes at the end of the film, where she thinks that Jim is infected, but gives him the benefit of the doubt for that 1 second, and that's what changes her completely. And whilst bigger decisions follow, and we always come to the inevitable Gordian knot, it's usually preceded by a collection of more heuristic problems which build up the narrative. So protagonists use mental shortcuts as simple strategies to navigate complex situations, allowing for faster decisions by reducing the mental effort required. They focus on relevant aspects such as the most prominent or relevant pieces of information to formulate a solution or judgment, and the end point is, as opposed to the drastic and radical outcome of solving the Gordian knot, characters make good enough decisions that satisfy the pressing need rather than the absolute or most accurate one. The point of heuristics is that they are quick and often based on cognitive bias and logic. Running from a horde of zombies is a simple decision, as every fight comes with bigger issues such as ammunition, location, size of the horde, and so forth. In Jaws, the most simple decision is to close the beach. Then, after Alex Kintner dies, they offer a reward for the shark, but after the final death in the pond, all basic rules of thumb are exhausted and we only have the Gordian knot left. The town won't go into the water, the summer is ruined, the shark is going to keep on killing, and businesses will go under. So it's either pay Quint the astronomical $10,000 or see Amity implode as a tourist destination and become a ghost town. The point is, we all make small choices based upon reason and bias, but in movies, there is more often than not the requirement for these choices to run out and the resulting extremes leaving us back at the Gordian knot. Okay, so we've talked about complex choices, we've talked about basic choices, we've talked about the Gordian knot, we've talked about heuristics. But how do we make choices? How do we decipher these things? What part of our biology does this? This is a really important part because we're going to come to our brains and the biology of choice. How does our brain make a choice, be it small or large, and is biology influenced by our psychology? Choice or decision making involves a complex neural network rather than a single brain part. Key areas include the prefrontal cortex for evaluating options and consequences, the amygdala for processing emotions and risks, the hippocampus for memory and learning from past experiences, that's very crucial, and our old friend the anterior cingulate cortex and also the orbitofrontal cortex for judging value and coordinating actions. So, our key brain regions involved in choice are prefrontal cortex, the central area for decision making, responsible for planning, judging, and selecting among different options. Orbitofrontal cortex, involved in assigning value to different choices and understanding potential outcomes. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, plays a role in evaluating future outcomes and helping to compare options. Anterior cingulate cortex, assists in decision making by integrating different types of information to guide behaviour. Amygdala, this area evaluates risks and rewards, playing a crucial role in emotionally charged decisions. Hippocampus, necessary for accessing and utilising memories of past experiences to inform present choices. And finally, frontoparietal network. This network, including parts of the lateral prefrontal and parietal cortex, helps in selecting and implementing choices by comparing options and identifying the most valuable one. Basically, decision-making is a coordinated effort among many brain regions, including cortical areas for higher-level processing and subcortical areas for emotional and memory-related functions. However, this is also impacted by who we are and what we have experienced, so our psychology comes into play with cognitive bias and experiences of error and trauma. In The Walking Dead, Rick's gang live in constant peril and so make their decisions out of mistrust and fear. When they finally meet Aaron, who comes from the village of Alexandria, which is based upon trust and niceties, Aaron is the polar opposite of Rick and his followers. Aaron is nice, benign, and offers gifts as he hasn't seen the harshness of the surviving world. Rick, however, straight away just hits him and then prepares to torture him. Each has a rule of thumb based on their heuristics, which informs their actions. Rick hits and says, "What's the worst? What are you going to do to us?" Aaron says, "We need your help. You seem good people. We want to work together." Basically, the snap decisions are made through heuristics, and finally, when Rick decides to take the group to Alexandria, that's a kind of Gordian knot. The group are starving to death slowly. However, going to a new community is dangerous, and they could end up being eaten as food, tortured, killed, you name it. So they have to make a choice, which either way is going to be drastic, but needs drastic action in itself. Our brains do biological and linear chemical reactions through the areas mentioned above, but the thought, decisions, and lateral thought, that comes from experience and perspective. So we will always make choices, either by Gordian knots or heuristics, and we will use hierarchical and counterfactual reasoning. Hierarchical reasoning is the process of breaking down a problem into layers, starting from the general and proceeding toward the specifics. Counterfactual reasoning involves imagining what would have happened if you had made a different choice. Okay, so we've covered biology, basic, complex, psychology, philosophy, history, and let's come to the action, to what Alexander the Great did himself, and the cut. Having made their decision, the protagonist needs to cut the knot and take drastic action to solve their immensely overwhelming problem. So, cutting the Gordian knot in a psychological context means facing up to non-linear solutions instead of trying to find a single perfect way to untangle the problem. keep everyone happy, see what goes, let's take time and think about this. No, there is no time. We have to make a split decision and we have to take drastic action. Basically, it's a bold or unconventional solution that may be more effective, and that bold action implies taking decisive action that transcends the complexity of the problem itself, rather than being trapped by it. And once a character finds the opportunity for progress, no matter how daunting, cutting the Gordian knot will lead to breakthroughs and new avenues for development and, in some cases, a chance of survival. Okay, so let's look at some Gordian knots being cut, and we'll go back to Saw first of all before coming to some other films. Let's take the original Saw film, where Adam and Dr. Gordon are locked in a bathroom, chained by their feet and given 2 hacksaws. The knot is that Adam and Dr. Gordon are chained up in this bathroom with no key, the door is sealed and there's a corpse in the room. The cut, quite literally in this case, is that Dr. Gordon saws off his own leg to escape the shackle, which is a brutal but decisive strike. In Saw 2, despite the traps being equally gruesome, the knot slightly changes. The knot here is that 8 people are trapped in a house which is filling with nerve gas and they are fighting each other for antidotes. The cut is the true solution, which is cooperation, as enough antidotes existed if they had all worked together to solve problems, but instead mistrust made the knot impossible to untie. But it's not just Saw. In The Dark Knight, the knot is the Joker's moral dilemma at the end with the 2 ferries that are laden with explosives. And the cut is that Batman refuses to play by the Joker's rules and the citizens refuse to blow each other up, breaking the no-win game. And finally, we look at the recent 28 years later. The knot here is that Spike's mother is ill, deteriorating, delirious and in pain. The cut is that Spike stages a fire and then smuggles his mother off the Haven Island and onto the infected, riddled mainland, where death is at every turn from either the rage-infected locals and their alpha leaders. Without doing this, Spike's mother will suffer and, with his dad already having an affair and kind of moving on, he will watch his mother waste away and die. So the knot is presented to Spike, and that is, do nothing and watch your mother suffer and die, or take drastic action that might end up killing them both as they leave their sanctuary. This Gordian knot sets the film in progress after the initial world building and introduction of the Alpha and also the risks of the mainland, and sets Spike on his adventure to meet the Mad Doctor and, eventually, the gang of Sir Jimmy Crystal. 28 years later also deals in heuristics for the early part of the movie, such as survival in intense moments and also conserving resources. But once Spike hears of a doctor, an actual qualified doctor in this post-apocalyptic world, he is left with a choice that will have dire consequences, and each outcome, whichever one he picks, has no easy solution and runs a high level of risk. However, by cutting the knot, by taking the drastic action of leaving and going to the mainland, he moves the metaphorical ox cart that was in Gordium and discovers what is really wrong with his mother and what the only treatment is. Spike's mother, Isla, then faces her own knot of drastic action as she has to decide what to do in terms of living and dying, as the true extent of her tragic illness is revealed in detail, and she is left with 2 heartbreaking ultimatums: suffer and stay alive, die now and leave her son alone. And that is where we will leave the Gordian knot. And that's it for this week's video. So remember that psychology is cool. Please like, share and subscribe, as more subs means more vids, and even leave a comment or start a discussion, as healthy debate is always welcome on here. And as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.
Welcome to your rebirth.